When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. And today's video, we're going to be talking about what if LittleFinger had actually died to Brandon Stark. Now, in the main timeline, we know that LittleFinger challenged Brandon to kind of a duel for Catelyn's hand, and Brandon basically almost kills him. Well, in this scenario, we're going to do what if LittleFinger was actually killed. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow and reach our people and I like this content as well. And let's get into the video. So let's say that Brandon actually ends up killing LittleFinger, you know, right before Robert's rebellion, and he ends up dying. Now, what I think is really interesting about this whole idea is that there is a theory that LittleFinger actually, you know, helped start Robert's rebellion with telling, you know, Brandon Stark that Lyanna and Rhaegar were kind of together and that he had like kidnapped her or whatever. And this theory comes from, you know, the timings kind of work out that LittleFinger might have been able to see Rhaegar and Lyanna at the Crossing Inn, as well as Brandon. So that kind of works out, but again, it's not proven, and we don't know completely if that's true, so I'm not going to keep that out of this kind of what if. But besides that, not a lot would happen before the main story with LittleFinger if he was to be dead. The only things that would change would be he would not have this growing bond with Lysa, and he would not be gaining any power with Jon Arryn and all that stuff. So when we get to the main story, LittleFinger would not have put the crown in debt, and he is kind of named as being someone that could almost get gold no matter what. So if you have a different Master of Coin, I don't think they would have put the kind of realm in as much debt, and I think they wouldn't have been in as bad of a spot. Now, again, Robert was someone that would spend a lot of gold and stuff, so they still would be in debt, but I just don't think they'd be in as much debt as they were at the main story. Also, we'd have to kind of find a replacement for who would be the Master of Coin. So the Master of Coin would be an interesting one. I think it would go to Tywin, because I think the only other person that they would kind of consider would be Mace, but Mace was an open kind of rebellion even as Robert took the throne. So I don't think that's what Robert would have preferred to do at that point. So I think Tywin would have ended up being Master of Coin, being kind of the richest house next to the Tyrells in all of the kind of realm. So I think that's what would have ended up happening there. So LittleFinger never gets appointed to that position. And LittleFinger does not kind of begin to start planting the seeds of maybe Joffrey's parentage to kind of Ned and maybe even Jon Arryn. We don't know if he ever, you know, gave Jon Arryn those hints. And there wouldn't have been this whole thing where we're really King's Landing and Robert Baratheon and the crown in general is in debt to Tywin. I think he would have, you know, they still would have been in debt, but I think it would have been mostly with the Iron Bank and maybe just a little with Tywin, not as deeply as it was. But that is kind of the main build up to the main story that kind of is with what happens with LittleFinger, right? So moving into the main story, Jon Arryn would not have been poisoned, right? Because he end up being poisoned by Lysa on LittleFinger's orders, and that's how that kind of happens. And we all know that Jon Arryn was very close or about to tell Robert that, you know, his children were bastards and that these were Jaime and Cersei's. So when you see that, if he doesn't get poisoned here, I think there's a very good chance that Jon Arryn would live and would tell Robert Arryn that all these kids are bastards and stuff. And I think what I think is interesting about this is that LittleFinger's not kind of here to prevent all this stuff and maybe, you know, kill Jon and then prevent it to where Ned comes down. That would never happen in this scenario, right? Jon Arryn would tell Robert. Robert would then have Cersei, Jaime, probably Tyrion, because he would also be in King's Landing. He'd have the kids killed, most likely. I mean, we see what he would have done with the Targaryen children. I mean, I think in this scenario, those children will be killed as well. Now, the interesting part would be if Tywin is made Master of Coin and is in King's Landing, he would also be arrested, most likely. Now, I don't think there's a way Tywin would be able to kind of sway all the gold cloaks and stuff like that and do this in a way that he doesn't get arrested. especially with Robert kind of having a jump on him, I believe. So I think Tywin would also get imprisoned and would be killed. I think Kevin Lannister then at this point would be kind of made, Lord of Casterly Rock, and I think he would try to avenge his brother and his family, raising the Lannister armies. But again, Kevin Lannister is not Tywin. I think Kevin would just be defeated by the rest of the realm. Ned Stark would be called upon. He would come down with the army. Jon Arryn would bring the Vale over. The Riverlands would be, coming over. So again, the Lannister house as a whole would kind of cease to exist. There would probably be a minor Lannister installed, to be Lord of the Casterly Rock and all that. And that's kind of how that would go. And that's the big conflict right now. If there's no Lannister, feud with the Starks because they get handled very quickly, there's very little conflict within the whole story, right? Because Robert then would probably marry Marjorie. That's what Renly was heavily pushing. And he was even trying to convince Robert that she kind of looked like Lyanna, that being Marjorie. So I think they would have gotten together. I think Marjorie would have at least gotten 1 or 2 children off of Robert before he probably would have died, just based upon his kind of health and how he was described. I think what's interesting is that if Robert dies, Marjorie would kind of have the throne with her children, and maybe Renly or Stannis kind of rules for a little while until their children come of age. So even if that is going to happen, I think you have relative peace in Westeros after this point. And the next big event that's going to happen is going to be when Dany would come over. Now, this is, of course, only going to happen if the assassins don't kill Dany. Now, this is the thing that's interesting, is Ned would not have been there to tell him no. Don't kill her. And I think that Varys would have easily continued, or not Varys, but Robert would have continued to just try and get her killed, and eventually one of them would have worked. Right, I think one of these assassins would have ended up working, and that Dany would probably have died. So I think the last Targaryen threat, really with Dany, would be gone. Aegon, let's say he is a Targaryen or a Blackfyre, what's he going to do? I mean, you still have Robert Baratheon on the throne. You have all these forces kind of united, besides maybe the Dornish, who could possibly go to Aegon. But again, they would be crushed if they came over. So with all this being said, I really don't see any possibility of, anyone breaking kind of the peace now at this point. For me, the real question would be, would all the forces that are combined in Westeros be able to defeat the threat of the others? And it's one of those things that's a toss-up. I really don't know. I think you would still have all the great military leaders alive besides Tywin. You have all the forces united. You would be able to kind of maybe strengthen somewhere like the Neck, or maybe if you're early enough on kind of Ned telling everyone to get their forces up north, maybe you could protect Winterfell. I think there's a strong possibility. Or you could even do the Wall. Now, here's what's interesting about the Wall, because it depends on how you believe the Wall is going to come down. Because if you believe the Wall is going to come down with the Horn of Winter, kind of how I believe it's going to happen, right? I don't think it would ever come down, because I think the Horn of Winter in the main story is with Sam, and then I think Euron may get a hold of it. Now, in this kind of story, that would never probably happen. Euron would never get that kind of power and stuff like that. Balon would never kind of revolt and all that. So I think you could very easily defend the Wall. And if that is the case, if the Wall does not come down, or if the others cannot get across the Wall, I think the living would win in this scenario, because A, you'd have a ton of forces, all of the forces of Westeros kind of up north, marching up north, defending the Wall, which is much easier to defend against than something like Winterfell, or maybe a secure like location and stuff like that. So for me, I think the others would win just based upon, or not the others, the living would win based upon A, the living can't get across, and 2, you'd have a really good force united by some of the best military commanders in all of Westeros. So with all that being said, I think this is actually a pretty happy ending. Surprise, surprise. If Littlefinger dies, so many people live, and we don't have a bunch of chaos. So that is going to be the end of my what if. I hope you guys all enjoyed this one, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.